All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about the welterweight division, Errol Spence, and an order that very well may be coming in the next couple weeks for him to fight somebody other than Terence Crawford. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back. It's your boy Fanon. Before I get into the meat of the video, please make sure you hit the like button, share, subscribe the video to the channel. It will be greatly appreciated. All right, man. So I think there's starting to be a little bit of clarity into what is going to be taking place in the welterweight division over the next year, specifically in 2022. A lot of people want to see Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford next. But some of the things that have been taking place in the last couple of days, I think, is pointing to something else happening. Specifically, Keith Thurman is coming out, and Keith Thurman is back out and fighting Mario Barrios. That looks like it could potentially be setting up a fight between he and Terence Crawford for later in the year. And a fighter, little-known fighter, who has been in position to fight Errol Spence Jr. for at least the last year, is saying that he is going to be fighting Errol Spence Jr. next if he is able to get past Cody Crowley. And that is, and I'm probably going to kill this guy's name, Kurtadio Abukakarov. I'm just going to call him Abu Kakarov. If I mispronounce the name, please forgive me. He's a Kazakhstani fighter. And, you know, I'm not a Kazakhstan. I'm not a Kazakh, or is that what you call him? Anyway, that's not the language I speak, so if I kill their name, please forgive me. But Abu Kakarov has been the IBF mandatory for Errol Spence Jr. for at least a year. And Errol Spence Jr. himself has not defended his IBF belt, his IBF mandatory, since 2018 when he fought Carlos Ocampo. Typically, when you have you hold a belt and you're a mandatory, you're supposed to fight every year. But, you know, there's the saying that, you know, that oftentimes unification fights will trump mandatory. So he was able to fight Sean Porter and not fight his mandatory. And then I believe that he also got an exception to fight Terence Crawford or Yordenis Ugas, who he's originally supposed to fight to unify the WBA and the WBC. But then at the last minute, Manny Pacquiao jumped in the equation and he was going to fight him. So absent him fighting for the WBA belt, which has now been being Errol Spence Jr., absent him being able to unify against Yuriorkis Gamboa, which has now been pretty much swept under the rug by the WBA when they ordered Yordenis Ugas to fight a guy named Stanosis. And also after that to fight Butiev. There is no longer that unification fight for the WBA that they had expected and allowed him to hold off his IBF mandatory. So now, more than likely, and according to Abu Karev, he is going to be fighting Errol Spence Jr. next. And the quote that he said was that, and I'm new about all of the mandatory stuff because that's been in the news for a while. People have been wondering when exactly, you know, Errol was going to the IBF mandatory. He just satisfied, and he also had fought Danny Garcia in the last fight he had with Danny Garcia. That was for his WBC mandatory, so we knew that his IBF mandatory was coming. So now that he's not going to be able to fight Yordenis Ugas, it's most likely that he's going to have to enforce that mandatory, and that mandatory may be Abu Karev. If Abu Karev beats Cody Crowley. Now, I'm not familiar with Cody Crowley, but this is a fight where it is a 18-0 Abu Karev versus a 19-0 Cody Crowley. So, you know, it's an undefeated fighter against an undefeated fighter. I'm not sure how that is going to play out. And if Cody Crowley were able to win that fight, it's not a title eliminator. So since it's not a title eliminator, it's not for sure whether or not Cody Crowley would become the mandatory if he beats Abu Karev. But Abu Karev himself has been the mandatory for over a year and is definitely due for that fight. He said that he has been preparing and has fought. This will be the third southpaw in a row that he's fought. So that tells you how long it's been since he's been preparing for Errol Spence Jr. when you get a chance to fight three southpaws, and he said in the fourth, which I have next, I'm gonna knock out Errol Spence. If you've watched Abukarev fight, there is almost no risk whatsoever in Errol Spence Jr. losing to Abukarev. That more than likely is just going to be a walk in the park for Errol Spence Jr. I wouldn't know if it's going to be as much as a walk in the park as the fight was with Carlos Ocampo, where it was a one-punch knockout with a body shot, a couple years ago. But one thing I will say for sure is that when the IBF has mandatories, they typically do not play with their mandatories. They enforce their mandatories. If this was like a WBO mandatory and it was a top-ranked fighter, I would say, maybe the fight will, maybe they'll, or better yet, better than a WBO. If this was a WBC mandatory, maybe they would enforce it. Maybe they wouldn't enforce it. But the IBF have been the type of people that have enforced their mandatories, even if it has cost them a lot of money. For example, Canelo Alvarez was the 160-pound IBF champion after he beat Gennady Golovkin. The IBF had mandated a fight between him and Sergey Deverenchenko, and he did not fight Sergey Deverenchenko, and they stripped him. It's not like the IBF is not like the WBC that is going to make exceptions for fighters just because they're make a lot of money. They will, however, in times where you have unification fights, they have been known to push the mandatory back, and prioritize their mandatory, right? So Errol was a multi-belt champion. They had a mandatory first, the WBC, when he beat Sean Porter. Sean Porter already had, I do believe, that fight for Danny Garcia was already on the radar. So once Errol Spence Jr. beat beat Sean Porter, pretty much inherited the mandatory fight that he had with Danny Garcia, and that's kind of how that pushed off. And then, of course, again, he was going to unify with Yordenis Ugas, but then Manny Pacquiao came in, and that fight got switched. So it's time for him to do that. Now, personally, what I believe is, I think, and this is me, this is not being an this is me as an Errol Spence Jr. fan and as a Terence Crawford fan, and really wanting to see that fight, but also see that fight where both fighters are really in the best condition. Errol I don't think he's only had one fight in a year, and he's coming off of a retina injury. So I think it would be good for him to be able to sharpen his skills, in another fight against Abukarev, which I don't think is going to be a very difficult fight. More than likely, Errol is going to walk him down and stop him. So I think that would be an interesting and an exciting fight leading into the Crawford fight, and then Crawford getting the fight, around the July timeframe with Keith Thurman, I think is also realistic, and maybe the two can match up in December, and it can happen like that. But anyway it goes, I don't think that we're going to go right to that Terence Crawford Errol Spence Jr. fight next, seeing as Terence Crawford is not with the promotional outfit yet, and so he's got to still kind of work that out and figure out where he's going to fall. But anyway, it is what it is. Maybe I suspect that Abukarev is right in that, and in insinuating or saying that the the IBF is going to order that next. I can't imagine the IBF going another year, another 6 months without enforcing their mandatory, and I would not be surprised at all if they pulled the plug on that, or if they executed that order not long after the fight ends with Abukarev and Cody Crowley, just provided that Abukarev is the guy that wins and they don't have some other guy that they may move up and say, okay, we're going to now order this IBF fight. Who knows, man? Could be Jaron Ennis, because Jaron Ennis is high in the IBF rankings as well. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.